Lydia Harper never imagined her life would come down to a single signature on a marriage paper. At 20 years old, she was supposed to have choices: time to dream, time to fall in love, time to decide what kind of life she wanted. But frontier life rarely cared about dreams, especially for women like her. Living on the edge of the Arizona territory where land, pride, and survival were all tangled together like dry brush waiting for a spark. That spark came the night her pa returned home pale, trembling and covered in dust. "They want our land." "Lydia," he whispered, "if we don't give them something in return, they'll come for us by sunrise." He didn't mean outlaws. He didn't mean renegade cowboys. He meant the Apache. For years, misunderstandings, broken treaties, and desperate settlers had turned the territory into a powder keg. Lydia's father had accidentally let his cattle graze too far into Apache hunting grounds, setting off a chain of anger he could no longer control. The solution came from the most unexpected man, Taza, an Apache scout known for his cold precision and unbending loyalty to his people. He appeared at their doorstep with 2 warriors behind him, calm and silent like a shadow in the moonlight. Lydia remembered the way he studied her sharp eyes, unreadable expression before speaking to her father. "I offer peace," he said, "but only if there is union. Your daughter will be my wife." The words struck her like a blow. She had never spoken to him before, never even stood close enough to hear his breath. Yet here he was, offering marriage the same way another man might offer a handshake. Her father's voice broke as he turned to her. "If you don't accept, Lydia, our ranch is lost. The town won't help us. We're alone." She had expected fear, maybe tears. But instead, Lydia felt something colder: responsibility. She had always taken care of her family after her mother passed. She had cooked, washed, tended cattle, saved coins, prayed for rain. This was simply the next burden placed on her shoulders. But marrying an Apache warrior she barely knew? That was a fate she couldn't have predicted even in her wildest nightmares. Still, when Taza extended his hand, she placed hers in his. The strength of his grip told her everything. He didn't want this marriage any more than she did. Yet he had reasons she did not understand, reasons rooted in his people's survival, maybe even honor. The wedding was arranged within hours. Dawn pinked the sky as Lydia stood before the tribal elders, her simple dress whipping in the desert wind. Taza stood beside her, tall and motionless, wearing ceremonial paint across his cheekbones. His presence was overwhelming silent power wrapped in calm certainty. She felt small beside him, yet strangely protected too. When the elder tied a strand of woven rawhide around their joined hands, Lydia's heart hammered in her chest. She expected him to look at her, to give her some hint of what he felt. But he kept his gaze forward, as if looking into a future neither of them could see. The ceremony ended quickly: no kiss, no vows whispered between lovers, no celebration. Instead, there was only a heavy silence stretching between 2 strangers bound by necessity. On the ride to Taza's homeland, Lydia kept her back straight and her eyes fixed on the horizon. She didn't want him to see her fear, but she could feel his glance drifting toward her from time to time, studying her quietly, as though she were a puzzle he had yet to solve. When they finally reached the Apache village, every pair of eyes turned toward her. Some curious, some hostile, some shocked. She was the outsider, the unwelcome bride. Taza dismounted and offered her his hand again. This time, when their fingers touched, she felt warmth instead of fear. His voice was low, quiet, almost gentle. "You are safe here." The words surprised her, not because he said them, but because he sounded sincere. That night, as the village prepared a small meal in their honor, Lydia realized something. She and Taza had entered this marriage blindly, 2 lives forced together by conflict. misunderstanding, and fate. And neither of them had any idea what would happen next. The first night in Taza's lodge was nothing like Lydia had imagined. Her mind had spun endless scenarios: the cold fear of a stranger's touch, the awkwardness of sharing a bed with a man she barely knew, the weight of obligation pressing down like stones on her chest. But reality proved even stranger than her imagination. Taza, the powerful Apache warrior she now called husband, didn't immediately reach for her. Instead, he unrolled a simple blanket on the floor beside the bed, gesturing for her to sleep on the soft mattress. She froze, unsure if this was an insult or an act of kindness. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice tight with nervousness. He shook his head slowly, his dark eyes unreadable in the flickering firelight. "You are my wife. I will not force you. Not tonight. Not ever." Lydia's heart skipped. She had expected force, or at least indifference. Instead, there was respect, and something else she could not name: patience. She climbed into the bed, feeling the unfamiliar weight of tension and possibility pressing around her. Taza sat silently by the fire, sharpening his knife in a rhythmic motion, the only sound the occasional tap of steel against stone. Hours passed. Lydia's mind wandered between fear, curiosity, and the faintest spark of admiration. Here was a man who could command armies, survive the wilderness, and inspire fear with a glance, but he had chosen to show restraint with her. Curiosity finally overcame her shyness. "Why? Why do you respect me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Taza paused, looking up at her. His gaze was steady, intense, and yet not threatening. "Because fear does not create loyalty. Trust does, and you must trust me before I touch you." The honesty in his voice unsettled her. She had never been trusted like that before, never been considered a person with a choice in her own life. And yet, she felt a strange comfort in it, but the night was far from simple. As she lay there, trying to calm her racing heart, she overheard Taza speaking softly in Apache to one of his brothers outside the door. "She is young," he said, words filled with concern, "and pure. But our marriage is more than her or me. It is peace. It is survival. If she refuses or falters, we could lose everything." Lydia's stomach twisted. Her marriage was no longer just a personal matter, it was a bargaining piece in a much larger game. Fear crept over her, mingling with awe. Taza, the man she barely knew, had responsibilities that outweighed her understanding. And somehow, he expected her to play her part. That realization made her ache, not with love, not yet, but with the heavy weight of duty. And yet, there was something compelling about the way he carried himself, about the intensity behind his every measured movement. She wondered what he might see in her if she allowed herself to be seen. Hours passed slowly. Finally, exhaustion won over, and Lydia closed her eyes, trying to block out both the fire's glow and the tension. She felt with every creak of the wooden floor. Taza did not follow her into the bed. But before the room fell completely silent, he spoke one more time. "Rest. Tomorrow is only the beginning." Those words lingered in her mind long after she fell into a fitful sleep. The weight of the unknown pressed down, but beneath it, a tiny ember of trust had begun to glow. She didn't know what the next day or the next year would bring. But for the first time since the marriage was arranged, she felt the faintest glimmer that perhaps she could survive it. Perhaps she could even against all odds thrive. The first night had passed. No words of love, no forced touches, only silence and the first cautious steps of mutual respect. Yet in that silence, both Lydia and Taza had begun to understand something profound. Marriage was more than ceremony or duty. It was trust, patience, and the slow, uncertain weaving of two very different souls into one life. and neither of them was ready for what would come next. The sun rose over the desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, but Lydia Harper did not feel the warmth. She felt exposed. Her new life among the Apache was nothing like the stories she had been told in the frontier town, stories filled with danger, savagery, and superstition. The truth, as she quickly discovered, was far more complex. Taza led her out of their cabin for the first time, his hand lightly on the small of her back. Lydia tried to keep her composure, but her heart pounded with nervous curiosity. Every face in the village turned to watch her, some with polite curiosity, some with suspicion, and a few with outright disdain. She was the outsider, the bride who had arrived not through love, but through necessity, a pawn in a piece she barely understood. The Apache village was alive with activity. Women moved with skill and efficiency, grinding corn, tending fires, and weaving clothing from hides. Children laughed and ran between them, oblivious to the politics that had forced this marriage. Warriors trained with bows and knives, their movements precise and disciplined. Lydia watched it all, captivated and terrified at once. This world was both beautiful and dangerous, and she felt like a fragile glass figure among mountains of iron. Taza guided her to the center of the village, where the elders had gathered. They studied her silently, their expressions unreadable. Lydia felt their eyes like fire on her skin, measuring her, judging her worth. She realized that she was not only learning the customs of a new world, she was under constant scrutiny, tested at every step. One misstep could have dire consequences. Despite her anxiety, Lydia found herself drawn to the women. They were strong and confident, their hands skilled in work and in care. One older woman, Ahuli, approached her with a smile that softened the tension in Lydia's chest. She offered Lydia bread and water, simple gestures that spoke of acceptance. For the first time since the marriage, Lydia felt a flicker of hope that she could belong here, that perhaps this life might not be the prison she had feared, yet danger lingered just beyond the edges of village life. Taza's gaze never strayed far from the horizon. He taught Lydia to notice the small signs, footprints in the sand, distant smoke signals, the subtle change in wind patterns that might signal approaching riders. Lydia realized quickly that her world, her safety, was fragile. One misstep could bring death, not just for her, but for her family. As the day wore on, Lydia began to notice subtle signs of jealousy and resentment. Some of the younger warriors whispered when she passed, their eyes sharp and critical. She overheard fragments of conversation, some calling her weak, some questioning whether she truly belonged in their midst. Even as she learned their customs, she felt the constant pressure to prove herself, to show that she was more than a sheltered frontier girl. Despite the tension, Taza remained her steady anchor. He never forced her to speak, never pushed her beyond what she could handle, but he guided her with quiet strength. When she faltered, he was there not to scold, but to offer subtle correction. When danger loomed nearby, he was the one who would silently step forward, a shield between her and the unknown. By sunset, Lydia felt exhausted, overwhelmed, and yet strangely alive. She was learning not only about the Apache world, but about herself. She discovered a resilience she hadn't known existed, a courage that flickered even in moments of fear. And in the way Taza watched her, protective but restrained, she began to sense a connection deeper than duty or obligation. Though she did not yet understand it, that night, as she lay in their cabin, Lydia stared at the firelight flickering across the walls. The day had been a revelation, a glimpse of beauty, danger, and strength all interwoven. She realized that her journey was just beginning, and that surviving the Apache village would require more than courage. It would require trust, patience, and a willingness to embrace a world that was completely foreign. And beneath it all, in the quiet moments when she thought no one was watching, Lydia wondered about Taza, Who was he beyond the stoic warrior she had glimpsed? What secrets did he carry, hidden behind his calm exterior? And most terrifying of all, would she ever truly belong in a life that was as unpredictable as the desert wind? The answers would come, but only slowly, and only if she dared to step fully into this dangerous, beautiful world. The storm hit without warning, rolling across the desert in violent waves of wind, rain, and lightning that split the sky like a blade. Lydia Harper had never seen a storm like this in her life. The wind tore through the trees surrounding the village, rattling the lodge walls and sending a chill straight through her bones. She huddled beneath the blanket, shivering, the fear in her chest stronger than anything she had felt before. Taza noticed immediately. Even in the dim firelight, he could see the tension coiled inside her, the way her small body trembled despite the warmth of the room. He approached quietly, his steps deliberate and careful, as though the very act of moving might shatter the fragile peace between them. "Lydia," he said softly, his voice low and steady, cutting through the roar of the storm. "Are you frightened?" She swallowed hard, trying to ignore the panic rising inside her. I've never felt a storm like this," she admitted, her voice trembling as much from fear as from the sound of it. It's terrifying." Taza knelt beside her, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He did not reach for her immediately. He simply remained there, silent and watchful. Lydia felt his presence like a protective shield, and something deep inside her began to relax. She realized for the first time that this man, her husband, was not just powerful, not just fierce, but gentle when it mattered most. Then, almost instinctively, he extended his hand. It hovered near hers for a moment, as though asking permission before bridging the distance between them. Lydia hesitated, her pulse racing. The first time she had touched him had been fleeting, controlled, but now there was a storm outside, and something raw and urgent in the air. She reached out slowly, trembling, and their fingers brushed. The contact was electric, a spark that leapt from his skin to hers, igniting a strange and frightening warmth. Neither spoke. Words felt inadequate, unnecessary. The touch itself said more than any conversation could. Taza's hand was steady, warm, and reassuring. It was a promise that she was safe, that he would not harm her, and that this connection, tentative, fragile, was theirs alone. Lydia felt her breath catch, a rush of emotion she could not name, blending fear, relief, curiosity, and something dangerously close to desire. "I've never," she began, then stopped, embarrassed by the intensity of the moment. He said, pressing a finger lightly against her lips. "There is no need for words." "Not yet." The storm raged on outside, lightning illuminating the room in brief, violent flashes. Each bolt seemed to mirror the tension inside her, shattering, electric, and impossible to ignore. She pressed closer to him, almost instinctively seeking comfort, and he did not pull away. For the first time since their marriage, Lydia felt a connection that was entirely their own. It was more than duty, more than survival, it was recognition. A mutual acknowledgement that both were strangers navigating the unknown together, and that together they could weather anything. Hours passed like this, a quiet closeness, broken only by the occasional crack of thunder. Taza remained patient, never forcing her, never rushing. He allowed her the space to explore her feelings, to trust him at her own pace. Lydia began to understand that strength was not only in wielding a weapon or commanding a village, it was in restraint, in choosing when to act and when to wait. By the time the storm began to subside, a shift had taken place between them. The fear that had defined their first night together had been replaced by something subtler, deeper, and infinitely more powerful: trust. Lydia no longer saw Taza solely as a fearsome warrior. She saw him as a protector, a teacher, and perhaps, even if she could not yet admit it, Man, she could learn to love Dot. As the final rumble of thunder faded into the distance, Lydia lay back, her hand still in his. He did not withdraw, but simply allowed the silence to settle around them, letting the warmth of their touch speak louder than words ever could, for both of them. The storm had passed, but what it had awakened was only the beginning. The first touch had changed everything. It was the fragile, unspoken promise that their journey together would not be defined by obligation or fear, but by a bond that neither could ignore and neither fully understood. And in that quiet, fragile moment, Lydia realized something she had never imagined possible. Marriage could feel like safety, like fire, and like destiny all at once. Life among the Apache was starting to feel almost familiar to Lydia Harper almost. She had learned their customs, adapted to the rhythms of the village, and even begun to find a strange beauty in the desert's harshness. Yet peace, she soon discovered, was never permanent, especially when it came to people who felt threatened by her very existence. The first warning came in whispers. One afternoon, while helping Ahuli weave baskets near the communal fire, Lydia caught the faintest edge of disapproval in the eyes of the younger warriors. Their stares lingered, sharp and questioning, and when she passed, she overheard one mutter something that made her blood run cold. "She is weak. She does not belong here." Lydia swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus on her work. But she couldn't ignore the tension coiling around her like a predator in the brush. Taza noticed too, though he said nothing at the moment, his sharp gaze following the muttering men as if calculating every threat before it had a chance to strike. Not long after, another danger emerged from the outside. Word of her unusual marriage had reached nearby frontier towns, where a man Lydia had known in her youth, Samuel Carver, a former suitor, gathered a small posse. Samuel had always assumed that Lydia would one day belong to him, and the news that she was now married to an Apache warrior filled him with rage. He rallied men under the pretense of rescuing her, blind to the fact that she did not need rescuing. When scouts warned Taza of approaching strangers, Lydia saw the change in him. The calm, controlled warrior she had come to respect became a whirlwind of strategy and alertness. Every warrior in the village prepared silently, weapons in hand, but Taza's eyes remained fixed on her. "You must stay inside," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Do not step outside until I say it is safe." The hours that followed were tense. Lydia watched as men moved like shadows, preparing for an attack she could barely imagine. The whispers of disloyalty inside the tribe merged with the threat from outside, creating a web of danger that wrapped around her like vines. She realized with a sinking heart that her marriage had not only put her in a strange, new world, it had made her a target. Then the attack came, sudden and violent. Samuel Carver and his men rode into the edge of the village, rifles raised, horses kicking up clouds of dust. The village warriors answered immediately, arrows whistling and bows drawn. Lydia crouched inside the lodge, heart hammering, as the chaos erupted, and in the midst of the violence, Lydia realized her own courage. She could see Taza engaged in combat, every movement precise, every strike deadly, but she also saw a moment when a rifle barrel swung toward him, aimed with intent to kill. Without thinking, Lydia stepped forward, throwing herself between the weapon and Taza. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the ground, and Taza's eyes widened in shock and gratitude. "You are reckless," he whispered later once the attackers were driven off. But his voice was not angry. There was awe there, respect, and something more, a recognition that she had proven herself in a way that words could not express. The danger had passed for the moment, but the lesson was clear. Lydia was no longer simply a guest in this world. She was part of it, whether the village or the settlers liked it or not. And Taza, stoic, fierce, and watchful, was now not just her protector, but her partner in survival. That night, as the dust settled and the village returned to its rhythms, Lydia lay beside Taza, her mind racing. The storm of enemies, both internal and external, had revealed truths about herself she could no longer ignore. She was braver than she had imagined, stronger than she had believed, and perhaps most importantly, she had begun to understand the depth of her bond with Taza, a bond forged not by love yet, but by mutual trust, necessity, and shared danger. For the first time, Lydia Harper realized that life could no longer be dictated by fear or expectation. The world outside was hostile, the world within complicated, but somewhere in the middle, she was carving out a place of her own. And in that place, Taza was no longer just her husband in name. He was becoming the man she might one day choose, if she dared to take that leap of heart. The night was quiet, but the weight of what had passed lingered. Lydia understood now. Surviving the Apache village and the world beyond would require courage, wisdom, and an unwavering heart. And as she drifted to sleep, her thoughts were filled not with fear, but with anticipation for the first time. She was ready to face whatever came next. The desert night was quiet, almost deceptively peaceful. As Lydia Harper and Taza settled into the lodge after another day of tension. The earlier attack had left the village on edge, but the immediate danger had passed and a fragile sense of normalcy had returned. Yet Lydia could feel the currents of fear and admiration swirling within her, a mix that made her heart pound in ways she hadn't expected. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Taza sat near the entrance, his bow resting against his knees, eyes scanning the darkness outside. He was a mountain of stillness and control, yet there was a tension in his shoulders that Lydia had never seen before. She understood now that being Taza's wife was not just about learning his custom, it was about understanding his burdens. The weight of his responsibilities and the fierce loyalty he carried for his people died as the hours passed. A distant noise drew their attention. Voices rough, urgent, unmistakably hostile drifted from the edge of the village. Lydia's heart leaped. She recognized the tone. Danger was approaching again. Taza rose silently, motioning for the others to prepare. But Lydia, despite her fear, felt an unexpected surge of determination. She didn't wait for orders. She ran toward the entrance, heart hammering, and threw herself in front of Taza just as a stray bullet whistled past him. Time seemed to slow. The bullet missed her by inches, but the act itself, the bravery, the choice etched something irrevocable into their relationship. Taza's eyes widened, a mixture of shock, awe, and an emotion Lydia couldn't immediately identify. "You're reckless," he said, his voice low, dangerous, and filled with tension. But Lydia noticed the undercurrent. It wasn't anger. It was acknowledgement, respect, perhaps even admiration. "I chose you," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I'm yours. Not because I have to be, but because I want to be." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. In that instant, Taza saw her not as a young, inexperienced girl forced into a marriage, but as a woman who understood courage, sacrifice, and loyalty. He saw her strength mirrored his own, and for the first time, their bond felt mutual, unspoken, and undeniable. When the danger finally passed, the village warriors managing to drive off the remaining attackers, Lydia and Taza stood in the aftermath, their hearts still racing from the encounter. But the moment had changed everything. She had proven herself, not just to the tribe, not just to the outsiders, but to Taza himself. And in that proof lay a new foundation for their marriage, one built on choice rather than obligation. That night, as they returned to the lodge, the air between them was charged in a way Lydia had never experienced. She felt the heat of his gaze, the careful tension of his stance, and she understood that this was no longer about restraint or duty. Something deeper was stirring, a connection that could no longer be ignored or postponed. In the quiet of the lodge, Lydia approached him, her small hand brushing his arm, testing the boundary between caution and desire. Taza did not withdraw, nor did he push her away. Instead, he let the moment stretch, letting the firelight illuminate the subtle shift in their relationship. Trust had been established, courage recognized, and now slowly, cautiously, something else began to bloom. Their first night after the attack was quiet, but profoundly intimate. They didn't rush into passion or declarations of love. Instead, they shared a closeness that transcended words. The brush of fingers, the shared glance, the silent acknowledgement of danger survived together. It was all they needed to understand that their connection had deepened irrevocably. For Lydia, the night was a revelation. She understood now that love was not merely a matter of emotion or circumstance, it was a choice, an act of courage, and sometimes a leap into the unknown. And she had chosen Taza, not out of fear, not out of duty, but out of trust, respect, and the first stirrings of genuine affection. Taza, for his part, could not ignore the truth of her words or the courage of her act. For the first time, he felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crumble. In her bravery, in her choice, he saw a partner, not just a wife. And in that revelation, both of them understood something neither had dared to imagine before. Their marriage could be more than survival. It could be love. And as the desert night stretched on, Lydia and Taza lay close, their hands entwined, hearts racing with the knowledge that the next chapter of their lives together, chosen and unbreakable, was only beginning. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Lydia Harper and Taza found themselves drawn closer in ways neither had anticipated. What had begun as a marriage of convenience, born from necessity and survival, was slowly transforming into something neither could have predicted. A deep, undeniable love. It started with small things. Taza would notice when Lydia was tired and bring her water or cover her with a blanket without a word. Lydia, in turn, began to anticipate his needs, offering him meals carefully prepared or silently joining him on patrols through the surrounding desert. Their movements became synchronized, a silent dance born of familiarity and trust. One evening, after a long day of teaching Lydia how to track the subtle signs of the desert, Taza led her to a secluded canyon. The sun was setting, painting the sandstone cliffs in gold and crimson. Lydia's heart swelled at the beauty, but her eyes kept drifting to Taza, whose presence was as commanding as the cliffs themselves. "I never imagined this life," Lydia whispered, her voice almost lost in the wind. "Or that I could feel anything like this." Taza's gaze softened, and he stepped closer. "I did not either," he admitted quietly. "I did not believe I could trust someone, or that someone could understand me. But you are different." Their first kiss came slowly, hesitantly, beneath the fading light of day. It was not a passionate, hurried embrace, but a careful, deliberate connection, a promise more than a declaration. In that kiss, they acknowledged everything unspoken: the fear, the danger, the trust, and the growing desire that neither could deny. From that moment, their bond deepened in ways that words could scarcely capture. They began to share more than just proximity. They shared their thoughts, their fears, their histories. Lydia told Taza about her childhood, her dreams, and her quiet longing for a life where she could make choices of her own. Taza shared his own burdens, the weight of his responsibilities to his people, the battles he had fought, and the losses he had endured. Through these conversations, Lydia began to see the man beneath the warrior, and Taza began to see the woman beneath the frightened bride. Each revelation drew them closer, and with each shared secret, they found themselves relying on one another more than they had ever expected. Yet their love was not without challenges. The village remained wary of Lydia, and whispers of discontent continued among the younger warriors. Some questioned her worthiness, while others eyed Taza's growing attachment to her with suspicion. On top of that, the threat from outsiders men like Samuel Carver still loomed, a reminder that danger was never far away. But through every obstacle, Lydia and Taza grew stronger together. In moments of quiet, they would steal touches, lingering glances, and gentle words that reminded them of the connection they shared. Their love, once unspoken and tentative, began to flourish despite the surrounding tension. It was a love forged in adversity, tempered by respect, and nurtured by trust. One night, as they lay together beneath the stars, Lydia traced the scars along Taza's arm, the marks of battles fought long before she had entered his life. "You've endured so much," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And yet you still care for me." Taza's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "Because you have chosen me," he said softly, "and because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You are not just my wife, Lydia. You are my equal, my partner, my heart." For the first time, Lydia allowed herself to believe it. She was no longer the frightened, inexperienced girl who had stepped into an unknown world. She was a woman loved fiercely, respected deeply, and trusted completely. And in Taza's embrace, she felt something she had never known before, the certainty that love could survive danger, mistrust, and fear, and could even thrive in the most unlikely of places. By the time dawn broke over the desert, Lydia and Taza had discovered something far greater than either could have imagined when they first married. They had discovered each other not just as strangers bound by obligation, but as soulmates who had chosen to fight for one another, and in that quiet, unassuming moment, both understood that their story was only beginning and that the love they had found would shape every chapter to come. The desert was calm that morning, a soft golden light spilling across the cliffs and sand. Lydia Harper stood outside the lodge, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to truly breathe. The chaos, the fear, the uncertainty, it had all passed, at least for now. She had survived the attacks, earned the respect of the Apache, and found her place beside Taza. And yet, she knew their journey was far from over. Taza approached silently, his presence as commanding and steady as ever. He stopped beside her, looking out over the horizon, then down at her with an expression that made her heart skip a beat. There was pride in his eyes, but also a softness that few had ever seen in him. "You have changed everything," he said quietly. "Not just for yourself, but for all of us." Lydia turned to him, her heart full. "And you've changed me," she replied. "I didn't think I could ever belong. But now I can't imagine not being here, not being with you." For a long moment, they stood together in silence, the desert stretching endlessly around them. It was a silence filled with unspoken words, promises, and the weight of shared experiences. Every danger they had faced, every fear they had overcome, had brought them here to a place where trust, respect, and love were no longer just possibilities, but realities. That evening, the village gathered for a small celebration. The elders, who had once watched Lydia with suspicion, now looked on with acceptance and even admiration. The young warriors who had whispered doubts had seen her courage and determination, and there was no denying that she had become an integral part of their community. As Taza and Lydia sat together, hands intertwined, they were approached by Ahuli, the elder woman who had first welcomed Lydia. She smiled warmly and spoke with quiet authority. "You have proven yourself, child. You are not only a wife, but a daughter of this land and of our people. Your courage has brought honor to us all." Lydia's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of pride and joy, not fear. She leaned against Taza, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. and realized that this life, so unexpected, so improbable, was exactly where she was meant to be. And then came the news that would change everything once more. Lydia discovered she was carrying Taza's child. At first, fear fluttered in her chest, a whisper of doubt and uncertainty. But when she saw the look on Taza's face shock giving way to overwhelming tenderness, she knew that together they could face anything. "You're going to be a father," she said softly. Placing her hand over her stomach, Tazia knelt beside her, cradling her hand in both of his. His eyes were filled with emotion, uncharacteristic but genuine. "And you," he said, his voice low and reverent, "will be the mother of our child. We will face this together, always." In that moment, Lydia felt the full weight and beauty of their life together. The marriage that had begun as a fragile arrangement of survival had transformed into a bond of love, trust, and partnership. They had faced enemies, danger, and prejudice, and yet their hearts had remained steadfast, guiding them through each trial. As the sun set over the desert, Lydia and Taza stood together, gazing at the horizon. The world was vast and unpredictable, but they no longer feared it. They had built a life together, carved a space in a world that had once seemed impossible. And now, with the promise of a child, they were ready to shape their future. For Lydia Harper and Taza, the marriage that had begun with uncertainty had blossomed into a love neither had expected. And as they embraced beneath the fading light, they understood something profound. Life might bring trials, storms, and enemies, but it could also bring courage, devotion, and joy beyond imagining. Their journey was only beginning, but for the first time, they stepped into it hand in hand, hearts aligned, ready to face whatever the world might bring. The future was uncharted, but together they would write a story of love, strength, and family that neither had ever dared to dream.